Good morning, Crossbridge. Can you believe it? It's been a year into our 5-year vision. It's been a journey full of activity and also moments where we've had to trust God's timing. Some of you I know are new, or you've been new within this past year, and so it's a good time to kind of explain this handout, which for some of you should be familiar, and some of you this might be the first time you're looking at it. If you weren't able to grab one on your way in, maybe you can raise your hand. We have a few usher and welcome team members who can grab one and give it to you, or you can grab one on your way out. Now, for everyone else, as you know, we've kind of give these periodic vision updates. We've given them about 3 times a year to keep us all aligned on where God is leading us. Now, if you missed some of those previous updates, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch them there. Now, the front of the handout, as a review, outlines our vision frame. 4 sides that define who we are and guide us, our DNA. That is our mission, our motives, or our core values, our marks, and our map. Our mission at the very top is bridging cultures to build a family in Christ. And that ultimately drives our vision of raising up bridge builders. So on the back, you're going to see a chart that shows where God is leading us over 4 time horizons, starting with our vision, stated as this: over the next 5 years, by God's grace, Crossbridge will become a home where all its members together lead their lives intentionally as bridge builders to bring people to Christ. We want to see hundreds of bridges connecting people to Christ within Crossbridge, across CBCGB, and among our communities. And as we progress, we're also in the process of discerning how to focus on the most important bridges for us as a congregation to build, right? Trusting God to guide us in refining this vision further. Now, at the same time, in order to get there, in order to achieve this, I've said this before, that we also have to renovate our culture, our practices, even our structure in order to be in a sustainable position for raising up bridge builders. And so we identified 3 major challenges that stood in our way. The challenge of running a 3-legged race, right? The blessing, though, of being part of a larger church with many ministries. The challenge of how to help our members grow, and the challenge of burnout. And those challenges led to 3 background strategies, these big boulders, if you will, that can't necessarily be solved overnight, but require persistent effort. Little by little, we're steadily chipping away at them, trusting God for long-term progress. And so the first box, right, multi-congregational partnerships, begins in part with leadership and how we can represent all these different congregations in the bodies of leadership, like the board of elders and the board of deacons, in order for us as leaders to model first that kind of partnership for the rest of the church. And we've made strides. We're including a Crossbridge elder candidate on the ballot this year, our first in 5 years, if you can believe that. But we also want to think about, as we progress on, what these partnerships look like beyond just leadership, and more importantly for us as a congregation, and how they impact us as a multi-generational church. The second box is group-driven growth. Right? Small groups, community groups, these are crucial for spiritual growth and for learning how to build bridges within our church community. These groups are where relationships deepen and where we walk in faith together. And lastly, the third box is Sabbath culture. Right? You know, as I reflect on this past year, I realize, it's not just about doing less. Although that is a part of practicing the Sabbath, right? Stopping and resting. But it's also an attitude and a mindset of trusting God and living as His beloved children. Sabbath is a mindset that reminds us of God's care, His presence, His providence, even when things are extremely busy. Now this year, we have what we call a 3F focus that's building on last year's focus. So we're moving from planting seeds for partnerships to forming pathways for the next generation. Like, we really want to lean into and leverage our multi-generational church to build these kinds of relationships that testify to the power of the gospel. We're moving from plugging people into groups to fostering growth in groups. Again, small groups are the engine in our church for this kind of growth, both relational and spiritual. And lastly, we're moving from prioritizing rest in God to finding joy together in God's presence. I think Sabbath culture this one in particular is particularly challenging, right? But as we also think about all these things, we're focusing on how to cultivate joy together in God's presence, even in the midst of busyness. And that kind of ladders down to this semester. We have a few things that we're working on. Some of you have already kind of heard or seen or experienced some of these things. A few initiatives in line with our 3F focus. First, in September, we launched CB at Night, Crossbridge at Night. Kind of this reimagined Friday night gathering. It's time for worship and learning and fellowship where we hope to build these intergenerational connections and deepen relationships across the church. Second, spiritual growth plans. Pastor Pat is working and thinking and planning on helping our small groups and small group leaders develop these spiritual growth plans for individuals and for groups. Spiritual growth isn't just about learning new things, it's about transformation. It's about aligning our hearts and our actions with Christ's teachings, which involves both adopting new mindsets and also unlearning habits that hinder our maturity and our growth. And lastly, as we look to this fall, we're trying to leverage our Thanksgiving week traditions, things that we kind of already do as a congregation, like the Crossbridge Thanksgiving potluck, like sometimes we have a turkey bowl, and some of us like to play sports. We have a youth passion night to support. So all these things, think about how it can support our 3F focus. And this year, there's also a Sprouts Thanksgiving Fellowship on that Saturday, I think for youth alumni and college students. So throughout the week, we're hoping to be even more intentional with kind of the things that we're already doing, these kinds of events, to invite you, the congregation, to help us in forming pathways for next gen and finding joy together in God's presence. And so, all together, that kind of forms this visionary planning handout that we have here. That about wraps up this semester's vision update. If you have thoughts, if you want to get more involved, if you have questions, I invite you to come speak to me or speak to Pastor Pat, and feel free to reach out. Thanks.